Ventura, California, a peaceful city on the shores of the Pacific Ocean. January 1970, in the cold grip of winter, a 19-year-old young woman left her final shift at the shopping center. She planned to return home to study for her exams, but she never made it to her own doorstep. Her car was found in an empty parking lot, a tire punctured, still raised on the jack. The spare tire lay a few steps away. No blood. No cries for help. No signs of a struggle. Only a cold void, as if she had vanished into thin air. The only witness described a stranger helping her. Tall, thin, light-colored hair, around 30 to 40 years old. He disappeared at the same time Cindy vanished. For 55 years, he has never been found. This is the story of a complex cold case, suffocating and shrouded in mystery. A disappearance that seemed meticulously orchestrated. A series of scattered clues, vague testimonies, unnamed suspects, and investigative errors have allowed time itself to become the enemy. Ventura, California, in January of 1970, felt like a postcard town frozen between quiet beaches and the slow roll of coastal fog. People locked their doors at night out of habit rather than fear, and the Buenaventura shopping center, with its glowing storefronts and soft neon signs, was the kind of place parents felt safe sending their daughters to work. It was there, under the hum of fluorescent lights and the sound of distant traffic, that 19-year-old Cindy Lee Mellon ended her shift at the Broadway department store. She had plans that night: drive home, study for an upcoming exam, and prepare for the next day, like she always did. But the night had other plans for her, plans no one, not even Cindy herself, could sense approaching. Inside the store, just before closing time, Cindy moved through the women's department with her calm, methodical pace. Coworkers later described her as gentle, polite, the kind of young woman who didn't complain even when the holiday rush left everyone exhausted. That evening, she straightened a rack of dresses, clocked out, and exchanged a few quick goodbyes. Her plans were simple, ordinary, comfortably predictable. She promised one colleague she'd return early the next day to help with inventory. She joked with another about how tired everyone looked. Nothing about her behavior suggested fear, stress, a secret, or any desire to disappear. Everything looked normal until the moment she stepped into the chilly night air. The parking lot behind the Broadway store stretched wide under dim orange lamps. Even in its emptiness, it felt routine, a mall parking lot that hundreds of people walked through every day. Yet that night, something was different. The shadows seemed longer. The air felt heavier, and somewhere within those shadows, someone else was watching. Cindy approached her turquoise Volkswagen, a small car she drove to work every day. She had barely reached it when she saw the rear tire, flat, deflated, nearly collapsed against the asphalt. Later investigators would determine the puncture was deliberate, cut sharply through the sidewall. But Cindy, standing alone in the cold night, didn't know that. She only saw an inconvenience. Maybe frustration, maybe confusion, maybe for a moment the instinctive sense that something wasn't right. A man appeared near her car shortly after. Witnesses later described him as tall, lean, between 30 and 40, with light-colored hair and a pale, small vehicle nearby. He spoke with her, calmly, casually, as though everything were fine. And whatever he said was enough to put her at ease. He knelt beside the Volkswagen, working at the flat tire with a jack, the metal gleaming faintly in the dim light. Cindy stood next to him, arms crossed against the cold, her posture relaxed but alert. She didn't know him. Her coworkers later confirmed that without hesitation, this man was a stranger. At 9:40 p.m., two employees leaving the store walked past and saw them: Cindy, the stranger, the raised car. Nothing about the scene seemed threatening. In fact, it looked almost wholesome, someone helping a young woman in trouble. The employees waved, Cindy waved back. No one thought anything of it. And that brief moment, that simple wave, would become the final confirmed sighting of Cindy Lee Mellon alive. From that point forward, the timeline shifts into darkness. Sometime between 9:40 p.m. and 10:10 p.m., the parking lot changed. The coworkers who had seen Cindy earlier went to grab coffee a few blocks away, chatting about work and the long week ahead. When they returned around 10:10, barely half an hour later, Cindy was gone. The stranger was gone. Every sign of movement had vanished. Only her car remained, sitting on the raised jack, the flat tire still attached, the spare lying untouched on the pavement. No purse, no books, No sweater, no shoe prints or scuff marks, no trace of struggle. Cindy had vanished so smoothly, so completely, that even her coworkers assumed nothing had happened. They believed the man helping her must have been her father. They drove away without a second thought. It was as if the night swallowed her whole. Hours later, long after the mall had closed and the lot went still, a light fog drifted in from the coast. No one knew that a 19-year-old girl had been abducted, or worse. Her family slept, believing she would walk through the front door any minute, exhausted from a long shift. But Cindy never came home, and no call came to explain her absence. The house remained unnervingly quiet. It wasn't until dawn the next morning that the nightmare became real. Cindy's father, Leonard Mellon, left home early to look for her. His intuition told him something was wrong. Cindy didn't miss curfew, didn't ignore calls, didn't vanish without telling anyone. When he drove into the shopping center around 7 a.m., the silence of the empty parking lot felt suffocating. Then he saw it. Her Volkswagen still sat where it had the night before, lifted on the jack exactly as the coworkers had left it, the flat tire untouched, the spare tire on the ground. No footprints, no sign of activity. The cold morning sun cast long shadows across the asphalt, and Leonard felt the weight of something terrible sinking into his chest. He ran his hand over the car, calling her name into the silent lot. There was no answer. That image, a father standing alone beside his daughter's abandoned car, would haunt investigators for decades. And the mysteries began piling up instantly. Why was the spare tire left unused? Why would Cindy leave without taking her purse or books? Why was there no sign of a struggle? Who was the man helping her, and why wasn't he identified? How could two people disappear from an open parking lot in 30 minutes without a single witness? Questions with no answers, clues without context, a timeline that thinned into empty space. Investigators would later determine that the tire had been slashed intentionally, an act almost certainly designed to trap Cindy alone after dark. Whoever cut the tire knew she would need help. Whoever approached her knew exactly how to gain her trust. And whoever she left that parking lot with had vanished so perfectly that no one, not police, not the public, not her devastated family, could follow the trail. But on that first night, no one knew any of this. All they knew was that a bright, responsible young woman had left work like any other evening and never made it home. As the clock ticked past the morning hours, as police began their initial sweep, as her family made frantic calls to friends and hospitals, an unsettling truth slowly emerged. Something horrible had happened. Something planned. Something executed with precision. The hardest question of all wasn't what happened to Cindy. It was how it happened so quietly. That night, in the dull orange glow of a half-empty parking lot, a 19-year-old girl crossed paths with someone who didn't just intend to help her. Someone who used the darkness as cover. Someone who knew how to disappear. And from that moment forward, the town of Ventura would never look the same again. 9:40 p.m. A moment in time so ordinary that no one present realized it would become the anchor point of an unsolved mystery lasting more than half a century. The kind of moment that would later be dissected frame by frame, conversation by conversation, until every second became a clue, and every detail became a haunting question. It was the last confirmed sighting of 19-year-old Cindy Lee Mellon, and everything about it seemed deceptively peaceful. The Buenaventura shopping center had already begun to empty out for the night. Store lights dimmed, metal gates clattered down, and the evening air held that familiar mix of gasoline, winter chill, and the faint hum of distant traffic. The parking lot was sprinkled with only a few cars now, scattered across the wide expanse like forgotten belongings. Shadows stretched along the pavement, soft but thick enough to blur outlines and conceal movement. Cindy stepped out into this quiet, unknowingly stepping into the final minutes anyone would ever see her. Her coworkers recalled that she seemed calm when she left the Broadway department store. Not nervous, not rushed. She had plans to study later that night, plans for the next morning, plans for her future. There was nothing out of place. And yet the universe felt as though it was tightening around her, guiding her into a moment that would soon collapse everything she knew. She walked to her turquoise Volkswagen, its chrome edges catching the dull orange lamps overhead. As she approached, she saw the flat tire, the rear left, sunken and useless. a detail that would later become more sinister the more investigators studied it. At first glance, Cindy probably assumed she had simply run over something. But this tire wasn't worn, nor was it punctured by a stray nail or shard of glass. This was deliberate, a clean, controlled cut along the sidewall, a sabotage crafted to look like an accident. But at that moment, Cindy had no idea. She stood beside her car, scanning the lot, perhaps expecting no one to be around. Maybe she considered going back inside the store to call home. Maybe she hesitated, not wanting to bother anyone. And then he appeared. The man. A stranger, tall, lean, in his 30s or early 40s with light-colored hair. He arrived without warning, as if stepping out of the night itself. Witnesses would later insist they didn't see where he came from. Did he walk over from a nearby car? Was he already in the parking lot, waiting? Or did he follow Cindy outside, timing his arrival perfectly? The ambiguity would torment investigators for decades. What they did know was that this man approached Cindy calmly, casually, and offered to help. His tone must have sounded friendly, his demeanor reassuring. Perhaps he smiled. Perhaps he spoke confidently, the way someone does when they want to earn trust quickly. Within minutes, he had taken the jack from Cindy's trunk, set it beneath the car, and begun loosening the lug nuts on the damaged tire. Witnesses described the scene as mundane, helpful, polite. But beneath that surface, something else was happening, something much darker, much more calculated. Two co-workers leaving the store at 9:40 p.m. walked past Cindy and the stranger. They waved. Cindy waved back. She didn't introduce the man, didn't look frightened, didn't appear concerned. To the co-workers, the entire scene looked harmless, so much so that one later admitted she assumed the man was Cindy's father. No one stopped. No one questioned anything. But the details become disturbing when viewed through the lens of hindsight. The man was oddly quiet. He didn't glance at the co-workers. He didn't acknowledge their presence. He kept his eyes down, focused on the tire, or pretending to. His pale small car sat a short distance away, positioned conveniently, almost strategically, parked close enough to make a fast approach, parked far enough to avoid drawing attention. The coworkers continued walking, their shoes tapping lightly against the asphalt. They joked about grabbing coffee, about calling it a night. They didn't know that with each step, they were walking away from the last opportunity anyone had of saving Cindy. This 30-second encounter became the final intersection between Cindy's life and the world she knew. Everything after this moment happened in a shadow no witness could penetrate. When investigators later reconstructed the timeline, they realized something chilling. Even if someone had passed by just minutes later, they might have already missed the critical moment, because the abduction, if it happened physically, violently, or quietly, left behind no trace, no scream, no struggle, no object dropped in desperation. Whatever happened between 9:40 p.m. and 10:10 p.m. unfolded with eerie efficiency, and yet there were still strange, unsettling inconsistencies. For one, the spare tire was never installed. That means the man wasn't actually trying to fix anything. He was stalling, waiting, distracting, drawing Cindy into a false sense of safety, so complete that she would allow herself to remain close as the minutes ticked by. Secondly, the jack was left propping up the Volkswagen, an unsafe position for any experienced mechanic to leave it in. Why would he abandon the process so abruptly, unless he never intended to finish it? Third, the car door was closed. Cindy didn't try to grab her purse, didn't try to grab her books or coat. All signs suggested she either left voluntarily or was forced to leave quickly and quietly, leaving everything behind in a matter of seconds. Investigators believed the man likely convinced her to step away from the car. Maybe he told her he needed a tool from his vehicle. Maybe he said he heard something strange nearby. Or maybe, and this was the most chilling theory, he used a ruse so clever, so practiced, that Cindy didn't even hesitate. The biggest mystery remained. How did no one see or hear anything? The parking lot wasn't empty. People were still leaving stores, still walking to their cars, still talking as they passed by. But in that half-hour window, no one saw Cindy walk away. No one heard a struggle. No one noticed the stranger's car pulling out. It was almost as if the moment had been orchestrated by someone who knew the rhythms of the mall, someone who understood the timing of employees, the flow of traffic, the blind spots between lampposts, someone who had experience or had planned meticulously. When police interviewed the two coworkers who last saw Cindy, both struggled with guilt. They racked their memories, searching desperately for something they missed. A tone in Cindy's voice, a hesitation, a nervous glance. But no matter how hard they tried, they remembered nothing unsettling. Cindy looked safe. She looked comfortable. And this fact led to a troubling conclusion. Whoever the man was, he didn't just approach Cindy randomly. He approached her with confidence, purpose, skill. He knew exactly how to reduce suspicion. Most chilling of all was the possibility investigators quietly discussed. Cindy may have willingly walked with him. If he said he needed help, if he acted like a trustworthy adult, if he convinced her something required her attention away from the vehicle. But why would she trust a stranger? Because she thought he was helping her, because she was alone, and he appeared at the exact moment she needed assistance. Because predators often disguise danger with kindness. Years later, retired detectives would describe this moment as the most haunting part of the case. The sight of Cindy's wave, her smile, the gentle normalcy of it all. A young woman unaware she was standing on the threshold of danger. In that frozen moment, 9:40 p.m., the world still believed everything was fine. The parking lot was just a parking lot. A flat tire was just a flat tire. A helpful stranger was just a kind man lending a hand. It was only after Cindy vanished that the truth hardened into place. This was no coincidence, no accident, no harmless encounter. This was a trap that closed silently, invisibly, right there on the pavement beneath the dim orange glow of the mall's lights. And Cindy, with her polite wave and trusting eyes, walked directly into it. From that second onward, the case entered a labyrinth of confusion, dead ends, and unanswered questions. But the timeline, no matter how tangled the cold years became, always returned to this one moment. The final sighting. The moment when the night quietly shifted from normal to terrifying, marking the last time anyone would see Cindy Lee Mellon alive. The investigation would later call it a window of disappearance, a narrow, fragile slice of time when everything that mattered happened silently, invisibly, and with chilling precision. Between 9:40 p.m. and 10:10 p.m., Cindy Lee Mellon didn't just vanish from a shopping center parking lot. She dissolved into a night that swallowed every scream, every footprint, every hint of struggle. And to this day, investigators still can't agree whether those 30 minutes were the result of a sudden opportunity or the climax of a plan that someone had crafted long before the doors of the Broadway department store ever closed. At 9:40 p.m., multiple witnesses placed Cindy beside her blue Volkswagen, parked beneath a flickering sodium lamp behind the Buenaventura Mall. She looked calm, cold, perhaps tired after a long shift, but unmistakably herself. She was seen speaking to a man no one recognized. A white male, mid-30s to early 40s, medium build, neatly dressed, confident in posture. He didn't appear threatening. If anything, he looked like someone who belonged there. An employee, a customer, a harmless stranger helping with car trouble. Witnesses couldn't even agree on his hair color. All they remembered later was how ordinary he seemed. By 10:10 p.m., both Cindy and the man were gone. What lies inside those missing minutes has tormented investigators for more than 5 decades. Authorities reconstructed the timeline with agonizing care. They used receipts, time cards, closing logs, even the last customer transactions of the night to establish that Cindy left the store right on schedule. Employees locked the doors. The mall traffic thinned out. Maintenance workers finished their rounds. Everything was normal. But a normal night can become a nightmare in seconds. One theory suggests Cindy encountered mechanical trouble. Her car had previous issues, small, annoying problems that might make a young woman pause in a dark lot. Did the man offer help? Did he approach with a spare tool in hand, pretending to diagnose a problem? Did he lure her closer, step by step, until retreat was no longer an option? Another theory is darker, that the man wasn't improvising, that he was waiting, that he had followed her schedule, closing time, parking habits, routine, and knew exactly when she would appear alone. Serial predators of that era often used pretexts, a dropped wallet, a flat tire, a simple, "Do you have a minute?" Investigators wondered for years whether Cindy's killer was someone who had practiced the art of not looking suspicious. The most unsettling detail emerged when police located Cindy's Volkswagen. It was still parked neatly in its space. The doors were locked. Nothing looked disturbed. The car was almost too perfect. No keys in the ignition, no purse left behind, no sign of haste. It was as if Cindy had stepped away voluntarily and simply never returned. But hidden beneath the calm surface, detectives found a detail that changed everything. The spare tire had been removed. Tools lay out as if someone were mid-repair. The setup was precise, staged, two-staged. The lug nuts were loosened, but only partially. It looked convincing at first glance, but to an experienced mechanic, it was an amateur imitation of a car emergency. Investigators began to believe the entire scene was a trap, crafted to lure Cindy into a position where she was vulnerable, isolated, and unable to walk away. The next question was unavoidable. If the scene was staged, how long had the perpetrator been preparing? Security footage wasn't available in 1970, and the few eyewitnesses who passed through the lot couldn't be certain of exact minutes. Some recalled a man crouched near the Volkswagen. Others remembered a woman standing with crossed arms, watching quietly. But none of them saw what happened next, whether the conversation grew tense, whether a struggle began, or whether Cindy willingly stepped toward another vehicle. One chilling possibility emerged. She may have been coerced without force. A weapon concealed beneath a jacket, a low, urgent warning, a subtle gesture that turned a simple request for help into a silent abduction. Forensic teams examined the asphalt, searching for skid marks, shoe prints, traces of blood, anything to mark the moment Cindy was taken. But heavy foot traffic, wind, and the long delay before reporting her missing erased everything. It was like trying to reconstruct a shadow. Police broadened the timeline. They interviewed stores, diners, gas stations, nearby apartment residents, anyone who might have glimpsed a young woman being forced into a car. Some recalled a dark sedan speeding through the lot around 10 p.m., but descriptions varied wildly. Black, navy blue, maroon, two-door or four-door. Some said it looked old, others insisted it was newer. The contradictions were maddening. Witnesses swore they saw something important, but memory under stress bends, shifts, blurs together. Without surveillance or physical evidence, investigators were left with overlapping fragments of a puzzle that refused to align. Then came the most haunting question of all. Did the man stay in the parking lot until 10:10 p.m., or did Cindy leave earlier, alive? One team of detectives believed the abduction occurred swiftly, within 5 minutes of the last sighting. The parking lot noise, the echo of footsteps, and the mall closing routines could easily hide a sudden struggle. If the man subdued her quickly, using a chokehold, cloth, or a concealed weapon, he could load her into a waiting vehicle and drive out unnoticed. In that scenario, the staged car trouble might have been just a visual decoy, not the core of the plan. Another team believed the interaction lasted longer, perhaps even calm, which is more disturbing. If Cindy trusted the man, if she believed he was helping, she might have stood beside him for several minutes, unaware that every passing second nudged her closer to danger. 30 minutes is a long time, long enough for manipulation, long enough for fear to bloom quietly, too late for escape. The most unnerving theory, the one detectives rarely voiced publicly, was that the abductor may have positioned himself where no one could see the final moment, between cars, behind a concrete pillar, near the shadowed edge of the lot where the single broken light left a patch of darkness, deep enough to swallow anything. All that remained of Cindy's final 30 minutes were scattered impressions. A calm girl, a helpful stranger, a half-finished tire change, and a car that waited faithfully for an owner who would never return. 30 minutes that reshaped an entire community's sense of safety. 30 minutes that investigators replayed endlessly, frame by frame, in a story with no witnesses and no ending. Those who reviewed the case years later all reached the same chilling conclusion. Cindy Mellon didn't simply vanish. Someone orchestrated her disappearance with precision, speed, and a terrifying understanding of how to make a human being disappear in a crowded public place. Whoever took her knew that 30 minutes was all they needed, and they used every second. The morning of January 21st, 1970 began like any other for Leonard Mellon, a man accustomed to the rhythms of life in Ventura, California. He rose early, as he always did, brewing coffee and glancing over the newspaper, checking local announcements and classifieds. But beneath the ordinary hum of the day, A gnawing unease had taken root. Cindy, his daughter, had never been one to miss her routines. She was punctual, responsible, diligent, a young woman whose life was meticulously organized, from school to work, from study sessions to social obligations. And yet she had not come home the night before. Leonard didn't panic immediately. He reasoned that she might have stayed later with a friend, caught in a study session, or even stopped somewhere on the way home. But when minutes stretched into an hour, a cold knot of worry tightened in his chest. He tried calling her, as any father would, but the phone rang unanswered. No voicemail, no one picking up. A faint sense of dread began to replace the rational explanations he had clung to. By 7 a.m., he could no longer wait. Leonard dressed quickly, grabbed his coat, and headed out the door. The sky was overcast, casting a pale gray light over the streets. Ventura's quiet winter morning, usually soothing, now seemed oppressive, heavy with the promise of unease. As he drove toward the Buenaventura shopping center, he replayed the events of the previous evening, searching for any overlooked detail. Had Cindy mentioned leaving later than usual? Had she hinted at meeting anyone after work? The answers eluded him. When Leonard arrived at the parking lot, the scene that greeted him shattered any remaining illusions. There, under the soft orange glow of the streetlights still lingering from the night before, stood Cindy's turquoise Volkswagen, precariously perched on its jack. The flat tire remained attached, and the spare lay on the pavement a few feet away. Every element mirrored the last image seen by her coworkers the night before. But the absence of his daughter transformed the scene into something sinister, something unexplainable. Leonard's heart raced. He called out Cindy's name, his voice echoing across the empty lot. No response. He approached the car, inspecting it with growing horror. The doors were locked, the windows intact, nothing appeared disturbed. It was as if she had simply vanished. The meticulous arrangement of the jack, the flat tire, and the spare wheel now seemed less like a mechanical mishap and more like the work of a calculated plan. In that moment, Leonard understood the gravity of the situation. This was no ordinary disappearance. Cindy had not wandered off. She had been taken, though how and by whom remained a mystery. The realization struck with the force of a physical blow. His daughter, the bright, responsible girl who had walked out the doors the night before, was missing, and the only trace left behind was a car raised on a jack, frozen in time. Leonard contacted the authorities immediately. The Ventura Police Department responded promptly, but the early investigation faced obstacles that would haunt the case for decades. The parking lot, while relatively small, was open to multiple streets and adjacent businesses. Any witness might have passed unnoticed. The early morning light exposed no new evidence. The car, elevated and abandoned, became both the scene and the central puzzle piece, offering clues yet withholding answers. Detectives examined the vehicle carefully. The tire had been slashed through the sidewall with precision. Whoever did this knew exactly how to render the car immobile while maintaining the illusion of a simple flat. There was no sign of struggle near the vehicle, no overturned pavement, no scattered personal belongings, no drops of blood. Cindy's purse, books, and coat were gone, leaving investigators to question whether she had left voluntarily or had been coerced. Every detail, every omission added layers of complexity to the case. Leonard himself became a vital source of information, providing a detailed account of Cindy's routines, habits, and demeanor. He described her meticulous nature, her dedication to school, and her commitment to work. He emphasized that Cindy would never voluntarily abandon her studies or her job without informing anyone. This insight reinforced the theory that foul play was involved, that someone had exploited a moment of vulnerability to remove her from the world she knew. As the day unfolded, the investigation expanded. Police canvassed the surrounding area, speaking with employees, shoppers, and residents. They sought anyone who might have seen Cindy in the lot or nearby streets between 9:40 p.m. and 10:10 p.m., the narrow window that now defined the abduction. Witnesses were scarce, and those who recalled seeing anything provided inconsistent details. The man last seen with Cindy remained unidentified. Tall, lean, light-haired, driving a small, light-colored vehicle. Descriptions varied, giving little to no direction for the search. The psychological impact on Leonard was immediate and profound. Every passing moment without news felt like an eternity. He replayed the previous night in his mind, scrutinizing every memory for overlooked signs. Had Cindy seemed distracted? Had she mentioned someone who might approach her in the lot? Each possibility he considered seemed plausible, yet inadequate to explain the disappearance. The tension was compounded by the lack of evidence. No witnesses beyond those fleeting moments, no physical struggle, no forced entry into the car. Meanwhile, police began to document the scene meticulously. Photographs captured the car, the jack, the spare tire, and the surrounding asphalt. Measurements were taken. Every potential piece of evidence was cataloged, though the early hours of daylight offered little to illuminate what had happened in the darkness. Investigators noted the flat tire, the position of the car, and the nearby shadows, trying to reconstruct the final moments Cindy had experienced. Every detail, however small, might be the thread that could unravel the mystery. As hours stretched into the afternoon, Leonard coordinated with neighbors, friends, and family to expand the search. Posters were prepared, and phone calls were made to local hospitals and law enforcement agencies in surrounding areas. The sense of urgency was palpable. Each minute without Cindy heightened the fear that something irreparable had occurred. Adding to the complexity, rumors began to circulate. Some suggested Cindy had run off, though those who knew her immediately dismissed the idea. Others speculated that the man seen with her might have been a friend or relative, someone acting out of concern. Yet no one could confirm his identity. No vehicle registration, no name, no trace. The image of a stranger, standing beside a flat tire in a dimly lit parking lot, became a haunting centerpiece for a case that would spiral into decades of uncertainty. By evening, Leonard's desperation grew. He returned to the scene multiple times, searching for any sign, footprints, discarded belongings, even a fleeting shadow. Each trip reinforced the eerie perfection of her absence. Cindy had vanished without a struggle, without noise, without leaving evidence behind. The realization that someone could remove a young woman from a public lot in plain sight, yet leave no trace, was both terrifying and confounding. The investigation that began in those early hours would become emblematic of a perfect crime in the eyes of detectives. Calculated, efficient, and almost impossible to trace. Leonard's discovery that morning was the spark that ignited a search spanning cities, states, and ultimately decades. The abandoned car became a symbol of unanswered questions, a frozen testament to a night that refused to release its secrets. Through the lens of time, that morning remains one of the most critical moments in the case. Leonard's initial observation, his rapid response, and his detailed recollection provided investigators with the foundation upon which all subsequent inquiries were built. Yet the evidence available at the scene, though painstakingly collected, offered no clear path to recovery. Cindy Lee Mellon had entered the shadows between 9:40 and 10:10 p.m., and by the time her father arrived, those shadows had already swallowed her. As the sun rose higher over Ventura that day, the town became acutely aware that an ordinary winter morning had been transformed into a nightmare. The father's discovery, the abandoned car, the flat tire, the empty parking lot, was no longer just a personal tragedy. It was a puzzle that would challenge law enforcement, haunt the community, and define the story of Cindy's disappearance for decades to come. In that moment, Leonard Mellon faced the unimaginable. A daughter vanished without a trace, leaving only questions and an unyielding void. Every subsequent lead, every theory, every rumor would trace back to that cold, empty parking lot, the place where certainty ended and mystery began. From the earliest moments of the investigation into Cindy Lee Mellon's disappearance, law enforcement faced a chilling reality. There was no crime scene, not in the traditional sense. No blood spatter, no signs of struggle, no weapon abandoned, no footprints leading to or from the vehicle, nothing tangible to anchor the investigation. The Volkswagen, perched neatly on its jack with the flat tire and spare laying adjacent, was both a clue and a red herring. It was a silent witness to an event no one could fully observe, a puzzle piece that refused to fit anywhere in a conventional narrative of crime. Detectives arrived at the lot in the hours following Leonard Mellon's frantic call. Their first step was meticulous documentation. Photographs, measurements, sketches. Every angle of the car, every scuff on the asphalt, every shadow cast by the morning light was recorded. But the longer they observed, the more confounding the scene became. To an untrained eye, it appeared perfectly ordinary. To seasoned investigators, it was a canvas of omission, a crime executed with surgical precision, leaving almost no evidence behind. Investigators immediately recognized the significance of the missing tire repair. The flat had been deliberately slashed through the sidewall, a precision cut indicating forethought. Whoever committed the act knew that a young woman stranded with a disabled car would be vulnerable in the darkness. The placement of the jack, the partial loosening of lug nuts, and the position of the spare tire suggested that the perpetrator staged a convincing pretense of aid. Every detail was calculated to lull Cindy into trust, to manipulate her into a position where she could be removed without a struggle. The absence of any other physical evidence only deepened the mystery. Normally, a crime leaves traces. Scratches on asphalt from a struggle, a scuff on a door frame, a torn piece of clothing. Here there was none. It was as if the perpetrator had anticipated every possibility, covering tracks before they could be made. Investigators speculated that Cindy may have been approached in a way that didn't trigger alarm, spoken to in a calm, authoritative tone, perhaps even convinced that she was acting voluntarily. The subtlety of the abduction what made it both terrifying and perplexing. With no traditional crime scene to analyze, detectives relied heavily on witness testimony. The two co-workers who last saw Cindy at 9:40 p.m. described her standing calmly by her car, talking to a man they didn't recognize. Their accounts were brief, casual, seemingly mundane exchanges, yet they were the only definitive visual evidence of Cindy's last known moments. The man's description remained vague. White male, tall, lean, light-colored hair, driving a small, light-colored vehicle. There were no license plates recorded, no additional identifying features. And that uncertainty allowed the case to grow cold almost immediately. Investigators expanded the search radius, interviewing anyone who might have passed through the parking lot during the 30-minute window. Some remembered a dark vehicle leaving quickly, others noticed a shadow moving between cars. No one saw a direct abduction, no one heard a cry for help, no one reported anything beyond fleeting impressions. Every potential lead felt like grasping at smoke. The lack of a crime scene also complicated forensic efforts. In 1970, DNA analysis was non-existent, and even fingerprinting offered limited avenues since Cindy had touched nothing unusual. The asphalt and surrounding lot yielded nothing of significance. No foreign fibers, no hairs, no tool marks that could link a suspect to the flat tire. Investigators were left to theorize based on circumstantial evidence, weaving together fragments of witness recollections, vehicle placement, and timing to construct plausible scenarios. One early theory proposed that Cindy had been removed quickly and quietly, possibly coerced into a vehicle within moments of the last sighting. Another suggested that the staged flat tire might have served to delay her, buying time for an accomplice to position a car strategically in the lot's shadows. Some detectives even speculated that Cindy may have been approached under the guise of assistance from someone familiar with the area's rhythms, someone who understood how to avoid being observed in public spaces. The absence of a physical struggle or disturbance meant investigators had to rely almost entirely on psychological profiling. They attempted to reconstruct the perpetrator's mindset: meticulous, confident, patient, skilled at gaining trust. Whoever executed the abduction understood the power of subtlety, using the guise of help to manipulate Cindy into vulnerability. And the precision with which the crime was carried out suggested premeditation, a calculated approach designed to erase all traces of the act. Despite the lack of conventional evidence, police followed every potential lead. They cross-checked criminal records for individuals known to operate in the Ventura area, especially those with prior offenses involving women. They examined vehicles matching the vague description of the man's car. They interviewed residents, service workers, and anyone who might have seen a suspicious vehicle or person during that half-hour window. Each lead, however, seemed to evaporate under scrutiny. Suspects were ruled out, alibis verified, and yet Cindy remained missing. The absence of a crime scene had an unsettling effect on public perception. Families, neighbors, and co-workers struggled to comprehend how someone could vanish in a public lot under the eyes of witnesses with no evidence of a struggle. Rumors began to circulate. Some suggested that Cindy had run away, though those closest to her dismissed the idea outright. Others speculated about predatory individuals, possibly connected to serial offenses in nearby areas. But without tangible evidence, these theories remained speculative, fueling both fear and frustration within the community. For the Mellon family, the lack of a discernible crime scene magnified the emotional toll. Leonard and Cindy's mother, Martha, spent hours at the parking lot, retracing the previous night's steps, hoping to detect a clue invisible to others. They examined the asphalt, the positioning of the car, even the light poles casting shadows over the scene. Each return visit offered only a cruel confirmation. Their daughter had disappeared into a void, leaving behind a scene too clean, too orchestrated, to suggest ordinary misfortune. Detectives also noted the challenges posed by time. As hours became days, the absence of a crime scene meant that any evidence present could be lost or obscured by routine activity. Cleaning crews, morning deliveries, and pedestrian traffic all threatened to erase the subtle signs that might have existed. This reality added pressure, urgency, and frustration to the investigation. Every passing moment potentially eliminated a vital clue. Years later, cold case investigators would reflect on the limitations imposed by the missing crime scene. In traditional investigations, even minor details, a broken fence, a discarded glove, a scuff on a car seat, can provide breakthroughs. In Cindy's case, those touch points were absent. All that remained were photographs of the razed Volkswagen, witness statements, and the vague recollections of coworkers who had seen her minutes before she vanished. The crime without a scene became the defining challenge of the case, and yet, in that absence, patterns emerged. The deliberate puncture of the tire, the timing of the abduction, and the methodical removal of Cindy suggested a perpetrator who understood the dynamics of public spaces and the vulnerabilities of isolated individuals. It pointed to premeditation, meticulous planning, and the ability to erase physical evidence. In essence, the crime itself became a masterclass in invisibility, leaving only the echoes of what had occurred, haunting both investigators and the Mellon family for decades. The lack of a traditional crime scene forced law enforcement to innovate, piecing together a puzzle defined more by absence than presence. Every theory was tested against the silence of the parking lot. Every potential suspect was measured against the fact that Cindy had left no mark behind. And in that silence, the story of her disappearance became both more compelling and more terrifying. A young woman taken without a trace, leaving behind a scene that refused to betray its secrets. In the end, the phrase "a crime without a scene" became synonymous with Cindy Lee Mellon's case. It captured the essence of a disappearance so perfectly executed that even the most seasoned investigators could only speculate on what had transpired. And it underscored the central mystery haunting the case. How can someone vanish in plain sight, leaving nothing behind, and yet be missed by everyone until it is too late? As investigators delved deeper into Cindy Lee Mellon's disappearance, one of the most confounding patterns emerged. The trail of suspects, individuals who briefly entered the investigation, raised eyebrows, prompted interviews, and then disappeared almost as mysteriously as Cindy herself. The case, already complicated by the lack of a concrete crime scene, became further obscured by the vanishing of those who might have held answers. Early on, police focused on men fitting the general description of the last person seen with Cindy. White, mid-30s to early 40s, lean, light-colored hair, driving a small, light-colored vehicle. Several local men drew attention simply because they lived or worked near the shopping center or had prior encounters with law enforcement. One individual, known to investigators for previous sexual assault charges, had been known to frequent areas Cindy visited. His criminal history made him an immediate person of interest. Officers conducted interviews, checked alibis, and scrutinized his movements. But ultimately, he denied any involvement, and no evidence linked him directly to Cindy's disappearance. Within weeks, he had left the area, fading from the investigation as quietly as he had come. Another suspect was Edward Nelson Cole, who later claimed the alias Sam Roper. Cole's physical characteristics matched the vague descriptions provided by witnesses. Some accounts even suggested he might have been near the mall that night, although no one could confirm he interacted with Cindy. The investigation traced him to other states over time, and he too disappeared into the shadows of anonymity. By the time police had compiled background checks and sought potential connections, Cole had relocated multiple times, leaving only fragmented records and dead-end leads. Years later, sources reported that he died in Florida in 2005, leaving a cloud of questions without answers. Then there were the sightings, tenuous yet persistent, that hinted Cindy might have been seen in distant locales, most notably Oregon. Witnesses in Klamath Falls reported a young woman resembling Cindy shortly after her disappearance. They claimed she appeared to be traveling with a man, but none could provide identifying details. Police followed up, but the accounts offered no verification. Each lead created new suspects, new potential connections, but when investigators tried to track them, the individuals vanished or proved untraceable. Some moved to other towns, others left the state entirely, and a few simply melted into anonymity. Complicating matters further were local rumors, often dismissed at the time but never fully disproven. Residents whispered about a man known for erratic behavior, someone who sometimes lingered near the shopping center after hours. Others spoke of shadowy figures seen circling the parking lot, unidentifiable in the dim glow of the lot's streetlights. Detectives followed up meticulously, but each thread frayed before it could lead to concrete evidence. Names were recorded, locations canvassed, interviews conducted. But the subjects of these inquiries often disappeared, leaving only gaps where clarity should have been. Even among those who engaged directly with law enforcement, the uncertainty of intent added to the mystery. Some men voluntarily presented themselves, responding to publicity or police appeals, only to vanish again when investigators attempted to verify their stories. Others seemed cooperative at first, but provided conflicting information, creating more confusion than resolution. In every case, the absence of corroborating evidence made it impossible to determine whether these individuals were innocent, culpable, or simply part of the vast landscape of ordinary life, intersecting briefly with extraordinary circumstances. One particularly perplexing angle involved transient individuals who frequented Southern California at the time. The region's population of itinerant workers, truck drivers, and travelers offered a vast, shifting pool of potential suspects. Some had been seen near the shopping center during the critical window, but no one could definitively link them to Cindy. By the time follow-up investigations could be conducted, these individuals had moved on, often leaving only vague descriptions and fleeting impressions behind. Their mobility made them inherently difficult to track, a fact that frustrated both local authorities and federal investigators. The repeated disappearance of potential suspects led to a pattern that haunted the investigation. Each promising lead dissolved before it could be fully pursued. Detectives found themselves revisiting the same names, locations, and sightings repeatedly, often with minimal new information. The challenge of pursuing suspects who seemed to vanish as effectively as Cindy herself became one of the defining frustrations of the case. The community felt the effects of this elusive network of potential suspects. Rumors proliferated, stories grew more sensational, and speculation about serial offenders operating in the area intensified. Law enforcement faced the dual burden of addressing public fear while attempting to separate fact from conjecture. Every man who disappeared from scrutiny represented both a missed opportunity and a reminder of how tenuous the trail truly was. Some leads hinted at connections to known criminals, including notorious figures active in California at the time, but none could be substantiated. Mac Ray Edwards, a serial offender known for crimes across the state, was mentioned in discussions by both police and private investigators. Yet, despite circumstantial similarities in timing and region, no direct evidence tied him to Cindy's disappearance. The pattern persisted. A potential suspect appeared, seemed plausible, and then left no trace. In addition to external suspects, the investigation also scrutinized those within Cindy's immediate social circle: friends, coworkers, and acquaintances. Interviews revealed small inconsistencies, minor deviations in timelines, and unverified statements that, under normal circumstances, might have prompted further inquiry. Yet, like the external leads, these angles often collapsed under the weight of uncertainty. Individuals could not be located again, memories faded, and corroborating evidence remained elusive. The disappearance of suspects also exposed procedural challenges for law enforcement. Files accumulated, case notes stacked, and investigators juggled an expanding web of names, locations, and sightings. The inability to maintain contact with critical persons hampered efforts to reconstruct Cindy's final movements. Each vanished suspect represented both a dead end and a lingering question. Had crucial information been lost forever? Or was it simply waiting in another city, another state, another moment in time? As weeks turned into months and months into years, the vanishing suspects became as central to the narrative as Cindy herself. They embodied the frustration, the unpredictability, and the complexity of a case with no tangible crime scene. Each disappearance mirrored the larger mystery. A person removed from their normal existence, leaving behind nothing but questions and an indelible sense of unease. This relentless cycle, Cindy disappearing, suspects appearing, and then vanishing, cemented the case's status as a cold case. Investigators came to understand that the solution would require piecing together fragments of memory, traces of movement, and the faintest hints of presence. They recognized that every individual who had touched the case briefly, then vanished, might hold a key that could unlock Cindy's fate. And yet, the more time passed, the more elusive those keys became. Every lead dissolved into uncertainty, every suspect melted into obscurity, and the narrative of Cindy Lee Mellon's disappearance became an intricate puzzle with missing pieces. Investigators learned to chase shadows, document absences, and analyze silences, the very hallmarks of a crime executed with careful invisibility. In the end, the story of the suspects who vanished mirrors the story of Cindy herself. Both disappeared into a void that has resisted resolution for decades. Both left behind only fragments, impressions, and haunting questions. And both continue to compel law enforcement, journalists, and amateur sleuths alike to search for patterns where none may be apparent, hoping that somewhere in the quiet gaps of history lies the answer to a mystery that began with a single night, a flat tire, and a young woman who never came home. Months after Cindy Lee Mellon vanished from Ventura, the investigation took an unexpected turn, one that led police hundreds of miles north into the misty towns of southern Oregon. Reports began to surface from citizens in Klamath Falls, a small community with quiet streets and watchful neighbors. They claimed to have seen a young woman who bore an uncanny resemblance to Cindy, traveling with a man who could have matched the vague description given by her coworkers: tall, lean, light-colored hair. At first, investigators treated these accounts with caution. Sightings of missing persons in distant locations are notoriously unreliable, but the specificity of these reports and the timing made them impossible to ignore. The first report came from a gas station attendant who remembered a young woman in her late teens, appearing nervous and tense, purchasing a soda and a snack. She was with a man who seemed controlling, glancing around anxiously as if monitoring her movements. When shown a photograph of Cindy, the attendant hesitated, then nodded. "She looked like her," he said. "Eyes, hair. But she seemed different. Scared, maybe." The description sent shivers down the spines of detectives. Could Cindy have been transported so quickly and silently from Ventura to Oregon? If so, who had the means, the knowledge, and the intent to move her across state lines without leaving a trace? Other reports trickled in. A waitress at a small diner noted a young woman with long brown hair sitting quietly in a corner booth, glancing at the door repeatedly. She was accompanied by a man who spoke softly but firmly, sometimes leaning close as if ensuring she didn't wander. The waitress remembered the woman's eyes, bright, alert, yet wary. She recalled noticing a distinctive ribbon tied in the hair, though the style was slightly different from Cindy's typical appearance. Yet again, when shown Cindy's photograph, the identification was tentative. People are unreliable witnesses, but the pattern was unsettling. Detectives dispatched investigators to Klamath Falls, hoping to confirm whether Cindy was indeed present or if the sightings were coincidences, misidentifications, or desperate imaginings of a small-town community influenced by news coverage. They interviewed residents, scoured local motels, and examined transient populations for anyone matching the man's description. The search was exhaustive, but frustrating. No one could provide concrete evidence, no photographs, no video, no definitive proof. The woman's scene seemed almost spectral, an echo of Cindy appearing and disappearing like a ghost. One particularly tantalizing report came from a truck driver passing through the area on a late-night route. He claimed to have seen a young woman standing beside a compact car, a man leaning close to her, the scene eerily similar to the flat tire encounter in Ventura. The timing was crucial. It suggested that the disappearance was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern. However, when investigators traced the man's route, the story became even murkier. The trucker's recollections were vivid, yet when police checked local roads and surveillance, no corroborating evidence emerged. The sightings were fleeting, ephemeral, leaving only questions and unease. The Oregon sightings fueled multiple hypotheses. Some detectives posited that Cindy had been transported and held against her will, moving from town to town under the control of her abductor. This theory aligned with the controlled behavior witnesses described, the man guiding her movements, maintaining dominance, preventing escape. Others speculated that these sightings were illusions, psychological projections of a community desperate to reconcile the unknown. Every vague identification became a potential clue, yet every verification attempt ended in ambiguity. For Cindy's family, the reports were both hopeful and tormenting. Leonard and Martha Mellon clung to the idea that their daughter was alive, perhaps fearful but still capable of being found. They traveled to Oregon, had visited the diners and motels mentioned in eyewitness reports, and spoke with the locals who claimed to have seen her. Each encounter was emotionally charged, filled with the tension between hope and despair. Could this woman, standing quietly in a diner, sipping coffee and listening to strangers' conversations, be their daughter? Or was it another cruel twist of fate, a stranger who resembled Cindy enough to stir longing hearts, but who had no connection to her disappearance? The investigation's reach into Oregon also introduced jurisdictional challenges. Ventura Police Department collaborated with Oregon authorities, but communication delays and procedural differences slowed progress. Every tip required verification. Every potential sighting demanded resources to investigate, and yet the leads continually evaporated. By the time detectives arrived, the subjects of the sightings had vanished, leaving behind only memories and uncertainty. The fleeting nature of these reports created a psychological tension that pervaded the case. For investigators, it was the ultimate frustration. A young woman, possibly alive, seen in public, yet unreachable. Each new report rekindled energy and determination, only to collapse under the weight of missing evidence. Officers replayed the scenarios in their minds, imagining how Cindy could have been moved undetected, how a perpetrator could evade law enforcement across hundreds of miles. Every detail, the ribbon in her hair, the compact car, the man's controlling presence, was scrutinized, analyzed, and reanalyzed. Yet the trail remained invisible. Some theorists suggested that the Oregon sightings could have been orchestrated either by the abductor deliberately exposing Cindy to public spaces without revealing her identity, or by opportunistic individuals capitalizing on media coverage of the disappearance to craft attention-grabbing stories. This possibility, while chilling, highlighted the unpredictability of human perception and the fragility of eyewitness testimony. In a case already defined by ambiguity, these sightings became simultaneously tantalizing and unreliable, offering glimpses of hope shadowed by doubt. Despite the elusiveness of the sightings, investigators documented every account, comparing descriptions, cross-referencing dates, and attempting to establish a timeline of Cindy's movements. They looked for patterns, recurring locations, similarities in the man's behavior, and consistency in Cindy's reported appearance. Occasionally, small consistencies emerged: her ribbon, the length of her hair, her anxious posture, but none were definitive. The evidence was circumstantial at best, anecdotal at worst, yet it kept the investigation alive, a flickering thread connecting Ventura to Oregon across hundreds of miles. For the Mellon family, each new sighting became a double-edged sword. The possibility that Cindy had been alive, seen by strangers in Oregon, sustained hope but prolonged anguish. Every unverified account forced them to confront the cruel uncertainty of the case. The line between reality and imagination blurred, leaving them suspended in a liminal space of hope, fear, and despair. The Oregon sightings also influenced law enforcement strategy. Police began to consider the abductor's mobility, theorizing that Cindy could have been transported across multiple states. They examined interstate travel patterns, routes from Ventura to southern Oregon, and transient populations that could have facilitated movement without detection. Theories expanded beyond a single location, suggesting a level of planning and sophistication that was increasingly alarming. Yet, with every investigative advance came a setback. The sightings remained unconfirmed. Key witnesses' memories were inconsistent. People misremembered times, distances, and even the appearance of the young woman. Every new lead required follow-up. Every reported observation demanded verification, and every verification attempt often ended in dead ends. The case became a study in elusiveness, a complex dance between reality perception and memory. Through it all, the Oregon reports underscored a haunting truth. Cindy Lee Mellon's disappearance was not confined to Ventura. The reach of her abduction, or the illusion of her presence, spanned hundreds of miles, creating a psychological map of uncertainty and tension. Investigators realized that finding her required not only following physical clues, but also navigating the intangible realm of human observation, memory, and fear. The phenomenon of the Oregon sightings remains one of the most perplexing aspects of the case. Did Cindy really appear there, alive and fearful, guided by an unseen hand? Or were the reports the product of collective imagination, fueled by news coverage and community anxiety? The truth remains elusive. What is undeniable, however, is the emotional and investigative impact. These reports renewed searches, shaped theories, and intensified the urgency to uncover answers. In the shadowy spaces between Ventura and Klamath Falls, the mystery of Cindy Lee Mellon persisted. The fleeting glimpses of a young woman, the whispers of a man in control, the ephemeral presence in diners, gas stations, and parking lots, they became a haunting chorus in a story defined by absence. And though no definitive confirmation ever emerged, the Oregon sightings carved a path of possibility, a fragile thread that reminded both family and investigators that Cindy's story might still exist somewhere, waiting to be found. In the tangled web of California's unsolved crimes, one name sent shivers down the spines of investigators and locals alike: Mac Ray Edwards. By the late 1960s, Edwards had already earned notoriety as a methodical, cold-blooded serial killer, responsible for multiple abductions and murders across Southern California. His crimes were carefully orchestrated, leaving victims buried in remote locations, often with no immediate evidence of struggle. Naturally, when Cindy Lee Mellon disappeared under suspicious circumstances, investigators couldn't ignore the possibility that Edwards might be involved. The timing and location of Cindy's disappearance aligned uncomfortably with Edwards' known patterns. Edwards operated in areas surrounding Ventura County, often preying on young women traveling alone or in isolated areas. He had the means, the mobility, and the chilling ingenuity to abduct someone in a busy parking lot, conceal them, and evade immediate capture. Police began to re-examine his previous crimes, looking for behavioral parallels, and the results were unnerving. Many of his earlier victims had been abducted under seemingly ordinary circumstances, lured with small acts of deception, then vanished. The flat tire on Cindy's car, the stranger offering help, and her sudden disappearance bore a disquieting resemblance to his established modus operandi. Detectives pored over Edwards' known whereabouts during January 1970. Records indicated that he was in Southern California, though his exact movements were sometimes elusive due to transient work habits and frequent travel along rural highways. Witness statements, employee logs from construction sites, and even minor police encounters helped reconstruct his possible paths. While concrete evidence placing him at the Buenaventura shopping center that night was lacking, the circumstantial alignment was enough to warrant intense scrutiny. Investigators also analyzed the psychology behind Edwards' crimes. He was meticulous, patient, and unnervingly calm in the execution of his abductions. Edwards understood how to manipulate appearances, creating trust in his victims before seizing control. The tactics used in Cindy's disappearance, isolating her, presenting help, engaging in a brief conversation, then guiding her away from public observation, mirrored the psychological strategies Edwards employed with previous victims. Every detail, from the precision puncture of her tire to the timing of her vanishing, resonated with patterns seen in his other abductions. Public fear intensified as news of the possible connections circulated. Local media began highlighting Edwards' history, emphasizing his skill in eluding authorities. Residents of Ventura and surrounding counties revisited the night of Cindy's disappearance, searching for anything they might have overlooked. In interviews with law enforcement, some witnesses recalled unusual vehicles and unfamiliar men lurking near shopping centers or highways. Small details previously dismissed as irrelevant now took on ominous significance. The potential of Edwards' involvement transformed the case from a perplexing local disappearance into a statewide investigation of a dangerous predator. Authorities attempted to identify vehicles and movements linked to Edwards. He often drove inconspicuous, light-colored cars, vehicles that could blend into suburban and rural landscapes without attracting attention. Witness descriptions of a small, light-colored vehicle near Cindy's car matched the general pattern. Police cross-referenced license plate reports, dealership records, and traffic stops, hoping to pinpoint his presence. Each lid was followed meticulously, but Edwards' careful manipulation of his surroundings left little trace. By the time investigators arrived, evidence had often disappeared, leaving only suspicion and partial recollections. Forensic limitations further complicated the connection. In 1970, law enforcement lacked DNA analysis and modern profiling techniques. Without physical evidence linking Edwards to the scene, hair, fingerprints, or fibers, any connection remained circumstantial. Despite these limitations, the psychological and logistical parallels could not be ignored. Detectives examined his prior crimes, noting the consistent strategy of luring victims with ordinary interactions, removing them from populated areas, and concealing all signs of struggle. Cindy's disappearance fit this chilling template. Adding to the tension were confessions and statements Edwards made in other contexts. Though never directly implicating him in Cindy's case, he occasionally boasted about getting away with things in ways that suggested a deep understanding of manipulating both victims and law enforcement. Experts later analyzed his speech patterns and behavior, noting a disturbingly casual discussion of criminal acts, a hallmark of his personality. This chilling insight reinforced the possibility that if he had been involved, he could have executed Cindy's abduction flawlessly and anonymously. Yet, despite the ominous alignment of patterns, no definitive proof surfaced. Edwards had left his signature marks on previous victims' final resting places, but no such evidence appeared in Ventura County. Search teams scoured areas Edwards had frequented, yet nothing conclusive emerged. It was as though Cindy had been whisked into a void, leaving behind no clues, a hallmark of both Edwards' skill and the meticulous planning that defined his crimes. The investigation also considered motive and opportunity. Edwards' known offenses often targeted vulnerable young women, exploiting circumstances where he could exercise total control. Cindy, working late and traveling alone, perfectly matched the profile of a victim who might be targeted. The premeditation implied by the sabotaged tire, the staged offer of assistance, and the careful orchestration of her removal were consistent with Edwards' calculated approach. However, without eyewitness confirmation, forensic evidence, or a confession, authorities could only hypothesize. Community impact was profound. The possibility that a known serial killer was operating nearby intensified fear, creating heightened awareness among parents, students, and workers. Local newspapers highlighted the potential link, interviews with law enforcement emphasized caution, and public meetings discussed protective measures. Families already shaken by Cindy's disappearance were forced to confront the terrifying reality that a predator of Edwards' caliber might have been nearby, observing, planning, and executing crimes without detection. Investigators explored every conceivable avenue, tracing his employment, tracking sightings from construction sites to highways, reviewing past police encounters, and comparing victim profiles. Yet every potential link remained inconclusive. Edwards' mobility, careful avoidance of surveillance, and the passage of time made definitive connection increasingly difficult. The very qualities that made him a successful predator, the ability to blend in, to manipulate perception, to erase evidence, also insulated him from accountability in Cindy's case. Despite the lack of direct evidence, the shadow of Mac Ray Edwards lingered over the investigation. His known crimes created a template that fit Cindy's disappearance in unsettling ways. Calculated, precise, and terrifyingly efficient. The flat tire, the seemingly benign stranger, the vanishing without a trace, all mirrored the hallmarks of Edwards' methodology. Law enforcement acknowledged that while they could not confirm his involvement, they could not rule it out either, and the possibility demanded attention. For Cindy's family, the potential link was agonizing. On one hand, it offered a framework for understanding how such a disappearance could occur. On the other, it underscored the terrifying skill and danger of the perpetrator. Every theory, every alignment of patterns only deepened the sense of helplessness. Edwards' presence in the narrative emphasized that Cindy's disappearance was not random. It was likely orchestrated, executed with chilling precision, and intended to leave no trace. In the end, the investigation into MacRae Edwards exemplified the broader challenge of Cindy Lee Mellon's case. A young woman vanished without a trace, leaving behind a web of possibilities, suspicions, and haunting parallels. Whether Edwards was responsible or not may never be confirmed, but the investigation revealed the terrifying efficiency of a predator capable of moving silently through communities, leaving families and law enforcement grasping at shadows. The specter of Edwards served as a reminder that in cases like Cindy's, evil often operates in plain sight, invisible in its careful execution. Each moment of analysis, each review of potential patterns reinforced a grim reality. Some criminals are so adept at covering their tracks that even the sharpest investigators must confront the possibility that answers may remain forever out of reach. And yet, despite decades of uncertainty, the search for truth, no matter how elusive, remained the driving force behind every investigation, every tip, and every lead connected to Cindy Lee Mellon's disappearance. The investigation into Cindy Lee Mellon's disappearance quickly revealed a frustrating truth. Despite the best efforts of law enforcement, forensics, the science that often brings clarity to the darkest mysteries, was rendered nearly useless. The scene at the Buenaventura shopping center offered virtually no physical evidence. Cindy's car sat on a jack, her flat tire still punctured, yet no fingerprints, no strands of hair, no fibers, no blood, nothing that could anchor the investigation to a specific suspect or crime. In an era when modern forensic science was still in its infancy, this absence was catastrophic. Detectives arrived at the scene on the morning of January 21, 1970, greeted by the eerie silence of a car left mid-repair, the tire lying on the asphalt like a grim marker. Leonard Mellon, Cindy's father, pointed out the placement of the vehicle, the tire, and the scattered items that might otherwise have been mundane. The physical clues were so minimal that investigators could only speculate. The punctured tire suggested premeditation. The methodical arrangement of the scene hinted at someone attempting to create an impression of benign assistance. But there were no fingerprints to match, no DNA to analyze, at least not in a way that 1970 technology could accommodate. Forensic teams attempted to comb the vehicle for hairs, fibers, or other traces that could indicate a struggle or point to the man last seen with Cindy. They used brushes, magnifying lenses, and the meticulous techniques standard for the era. Yet, despite these efforts, nothing conclusive emerged. A few hairs were collected, but none were clearly Cindy's or that of the unknown man. Fibers from clothing were analyzed, but without comparative samples, they were meaningless. The scene seemed almost sanitized, as though the perpetrator had consciously left nothing behind, an invisible crime executed with chilling precision. Law enforcement also attempted to leverage trace evidence. Tire tread patterns, tool marks on the punctured tire, and other minute details were examined. Investigators considered whether the tire could have been slashed by a knife, a screwdriver, or another implement. The angles and depths of the puncture suggested knowledge of how to immobilize a vehicle quickly and efficiently, yet no tool was recovered. Every potential lead seemed to vanish into ambiguity, leaving investigators with frustratingly partial information. Even Cindy's personal effects, which might have offered forensic insight, were largely absent. She had left her purse and other items at home, meaning there were few belongings at the scene to analyze. Law enforcement hoped that fingerprints, even on mundane objects like the steering wheel or dashboard, might offer a clue. They swabbed surfaces meticulously, but the technology of the time could only provide so much. Any latent prints that could have been present were either smudged, contaminated, or simply undetectable. The inability of forensic science to contribute definitive answers shifted the burden of the investigation onto witness testimony and circumstantial evidence. Two coworkers had seen Cindy with the man near her car, but their recollections were limited to fleeting observations in dim light. Details about his height, hair color, and demeanor were vague. No license plate numbers were recorded. There were no photos, no videos, just memories, clouded by the passage of time and the stress of the moment. In a sense, the human mind became the only investigative tool available, yet it is notoriously unreliable. Cindy's family understood the limitations of technology in 1970. Leonard Mellon later recounted his frustration as police meticulously cataloged every possible lead, only to return empty-handed. The tire, the car, the parking lot. It all seemed like a scene frozen in ambiguity, a puzzle with pieces deliberately missing. Investigators could reconstruct the scenario in theory, yet without physical evidence, there was no way to prove what had happened. Every hypothesis remained speculative. Every narrative fragile. Even the smallest traces of potential forensic value became the subject of meticulous scrutiny. Investigators attempted to analyze shoe prints near the vehicle, tire imprints from other cars, and even the pattern of snow or dust disturbed during the night. Yet the evidence offered only fragments, impressions that could not be linked conclusively to a suspect. The elusive nature of the crime scene underscored the difficulty of cases where a perpetrator leaves nothing tangible behind, a ghostly precision that challenged both logic and procedure. The investigation also explored early methods of forensic psychology, attempting to profile the unknown abductor. Behavioral analysts considered Cindy's personality, her routine, and the circumstances of her disappearance to anticipate the type of person who might have orchestrated the abduction. They assessed risk factors, tendencies of serial offenders, and patterns of premeditation. While these insights helped narrow the focus conceptually, they could not replace the missing physical evidence. The profile could suggest who and how, but not provide proof. Compounding these challenges was the fact that Cindy may have been moved almost immediately after her disappearance. If she was transported in a vehicle, as witness descriptions suggested, any trace evidence at the scene would have been minimal. Hair, fibers, or skin cells could have been left in the car, but in 1970, such trace evidence would have been difficult to collect and analyze. It was as if the crime had been executed with forensic foresight, the perpetrator leaving nothing behind that could tie him to the act. Law enforcement considered re-examining the case with emerging technologies, but decades would pass before DNA analysis could even be applied. Early forensic limitations meant that by the time modern methods became available, key evidence had been lost, contaminated, or degraded. The tire, the car, even objects collected during the initial investigation could only offer so much. The lack of physical evidence transformed the case into a labyrinth of conjecture, where investigative skill and intuition became paramount in the absence of scientific certainty. The frustration of relying on forensics that never came shaped the investigative strategy. Police leaned heavily on community engagement, tip lines, and public appeals. They broadcast Cindy's image across local media, encouraged the reporting of unusual vehicles and individuals, and sought any memory of a young woman traveling with a man matching the description. Every lead had to be followed meticulously because there were no fingerprints, no fibers, no conclusive traces to prioritize one lead over another. The burden of proof rested on human observation alone. For Cindy's family, the inability of science to provide answers was devastating. They knew that even the smallest clue could unlock the mystery, but decades passed without a breakthrough. Each day of uncertainty reinforced the sense of helplessness, an absence compounded by the lack of tangible evidence. The silent crime scene, untouched by forensic revelation, became a symbol of the cruel reality. Some perpetrators operate with such precision that even the tools of science cannot capture their actions. Yet, this void in forensic evidence did not diminish the urgency of the search. Investigators, journalists, and amateur sleuths continued to dissect the case, hypothesize motives, reconstruct timelines, and analyze behavioral patterns. They knew that in the absence of fingerprints or DNA, every small observation, every fleeting witness memory could be pivotal. The challenge became one of narrative reconstruction, piecing together a story from what was seen, said, and remembered, rather than what could be physically proven. Ultimately, the case of Cindy Lee Mellon highlights the stark limitations of forensic science in the face of an invisible crime. The flat tire, the abandoned car, the vanished girl, all represented the frustration of investigators and the emotional torment of a family desperate for answers. Forensic evidence that could have confirmed a timeline, identified a suspect, or validated a sighting was simply not there. And in its absence, the mystery deepened, leaving only a haunting question. How can one solve a crime when the science meant to reveal the truth is rendered powerless, leaving shadows and silence as the only witnesses? The story of Cindy Lee Mellon remains a chilling reminder of the fragility of physical evidence and the profound impact of its absence. It is a case defined not by the fingerprints found or the hairs matched, but by the haunting void left in the wake of her disappearance. Investigators were left to chase ghosts, rely on intuition, and follow the faintest threads of human memory, a relentless pursuit in which science, for once, could not intervene, and the answers remained just out of reach. The Mellon family's world shifted irrevocably on the night Cindy disappeared, yet the true weight of her absence became apparent in the days, weeks, and decades that followed. For Leonard and Martha Mellon, grief was not a singular moment, but a relentless companion, whispering through empty rooms, unanswered phone calls, and the persistent question, where was their daughter? The loss was compounded by uncertainty, a psychological labyrinth where hope and despair intertwined, leaving no place for rest, no moment of reprieve. From the earliest hours after Cindy vanished, the Mellons threw themselves into action. Leonard arrived at the shopping center at dawn, discovering his daughter's car abandoned, the punctured tire still lying on the ground. Panic immediately gave way to methodical concern. He called the police, spoke with coworkers, and retraced Cindy's steps. Each small observation, the placement of the jack, the angle of the flat tire, the scattered remnants of a brief struggle, became a crucial part of a puzzle he was desperate to solve. Yet the investigation, despite earnest efforts, offered few answers, and the lack of tangible leads began to sow a gnawing anxiety that would never fully abate. Martha Mellon, meanwhile, faced her own private torment. The image of Cindy standing beside the unknown man haunted her, replaying in dreams, in passing moments, and in reflections of everyday life. The question, did she suffer, echoed relentlessly. Every small sound, a car door slamming, footsteps in the night, triggered panic, a visceral reminder that their daughter's fate remained unknown. Friends and neighbors tried to offer comfort, but the Mellons' reality had become something apart from ordinary life. The community, while supportive, could not bridge the void left by Cindy's absence. Interviews with the family reveal the nuanced, daily psychological toll of a cold case. Leonard described nights spent awake, reviewing case files, photographs, and witness statements, hoping to spot a detail others might have missed. He memorized timelines, reconstructing every minute of Cindy's last known movements. Each potential lead, every tip, sighting, or rumor was a double-edged sword. It could be a breakthrough, or it could shatter fragile hope, leaving them once again with nothing. The emotional oscillation was exhausting, a cycle of anticipation and disappointment that became their new normal. Family voices also provide a lens into their frustration with the investigation itself. Leonard often expressed dissatisfaction with early police procedures, noting that initial opportunities to capture evidence or interview key witnesses may have been missed. In the context of the time, with limited forensic technology and less experienced investigative methods, such criticisms were understandable. He wondered whether small oversights had allowed critical leads to fade, whether the man last seen with Cindy had walked away without leaving a trace. This lingering uncertainty intensified the pain, converting procedural shortcomings into deeply personal anguish. The Mellons also faced the disorienting barrage of public speculation and rumor. Media coverage, though intended to aid the investigation, sometimes fueled confusion. Reports of sightings in Oregon, potential connections to notorious criminals, and even urban legends about supernatural occurrences around the shopping center created a haze of information. For the family, parsing truth from speculation became a daily challenge. Some reports rekindled hope. Others deepened despair, forcing them to navigate a treacherous landscape of partial truths exaggerations, and outright fabrications. Yet within this turmoil, the Mellons demonstrated remarkable resilience. They participated in searches, coordinated with volunteers, and tirelessly appealed to the public for information. Leonard and Martha refused to allow Cindy's case to fade into obscurity, understanding that in cold cases, the persistence of family and community can be crucial to uncovering long-hidden truths. Their voices, pleading, questioning, advocating, kept Cindy's story alive in the public consciousness, compelling law enforcement to continue the search even as decades passed. The emotional landscape of the family was further complicated by fleeting glimpses of hope. Occasional reports of a girl resembling Cindy, whether in Oregon or elsewhere, provided both relief and renewed anxiety. Witness accounts, though never verified, became emotionally charged events. Brief windows in which the family could imagine Cindy alive, only to have those hopes dashed. The tension between optimism and despair became a central part of their lived experience, shaping daily life around the uncertainty of a missing loved one. One of the most poignant aspects of the family's narrative is the way memory and longing intersected with practical investigation. They meticulously compared Cindy's photographs to reported sightings, reviewed her routines and acquaintances, and explored the possible motivations and methods of potential abductors. Each investigative effort was driven not only by the desire for justice, but by the fundamental human need to know what had happened to someone deeply loved. In the absence of physical evidence, their recollections and intuition became vital investigative tools, blending emotional urgency with methodical reasoning. The psychological strain was compounded by the passage of time. Each anniversary, each milestone that Cindy could not share with her family, birthdays, holidays, personal achievements, served as a painful reminder of loss. The family had to maintain hope in the face of mounting frustration, balancing emotional perseverance with the practical reality that leads were scarce. Their voices, through interviews, public appeals, and personal writings, convey the extraordinary endurance required to live with unresolved trauma for decades. Community support and continued attention from amateur sleuths and journalists provided intermittent relief. Volunteers scoured locations, revisited old leads, and cross-referenced historical records, sometimes uncovering small details overlooked in the initial investigation. Yet the Mellons remained acutely aware of the limitations imposed by time, the fragility of human memory, and the challenges of relying on secondhand reports. Their narrative demonstrates the intersection of familial love and investigative persistence, illustrating how emotional stakes and detective work can intertwine when modern forensics offers no definitive answers. The family's perspective also emphasizes the broader human dimensions of cold cases. Their pain is not only tied to uncertainty, but to the awareness that the world continues to move forward while their own lives are suspended. Decisions, celebrations, and daily routines are all filtered through the lens of absence. Their story underscores a profound truth. The victim's disappearance is only one part of the tragedy. The enduring psychological impact on those left behind is equally significant. For law enforcement, the Mellons' ongoing engagement became both a source of information and an emotional anchor. Tips generated by family persistence, coupled with media attention, ensured that Cindy's disappearance remained an active case rather than a closed file. Investigators relied on the family to maintain public awareness, to encourage witnesses to come forward, and to provide insight into Cindy's habits, friends, and routines. The family's voices became integral to the investigative process, bridging the gap between procedural work and the human reality of a missing person. In the darkest moments, the Mellons' experiences reveal resilience and humanity. They confronted the impossible. A loved one vanished without trace, with the weight of suspicion, rumor, and fear pressing on all sides. Yet their determination to seek truth, to preserve Cindy's memory, and to remain engaged with the investigation exemplifies the power of familial commitment in the face of uncertainty. Their voices, carrying grief, hope, and relentless inquiry, echo as a testament to the emotional stakes of cold cases, and a reminder that behind every unsolved mystery lies the enduring pain and persistence of those who refuse to forget. Through decades of uncertainty, the Mellons' story reflects both the profound anguish and the unwavering commitment that define families of the missing. They lived with questions that could never be fully answered, with moments of hope that flickered and died, and with a relentless determination to maintain the search for truth. In telling their story, the narrative of Cindy Lee Mellon's disappearance becomes not only a tale of mystery and investigation, but also a testament to the unyielding power of love, memory, and the human spirit in the face of unimaginable uncertainty. The figure last seen with Cindy Lee Mellon remains one of the most enigmatic and chilling elements of her disappearance, a man whose brief interaction may have sealed the trajectory of that fateful night. Witness accounts describe him as a white male, approximately 30 to 40 years old, tall and thin, with light-colored hair. He appeared ordinary at first glance, even helpful, offering assistance with Cindy's seemingly flat tire. Yet, in hindsight, his ordinary appearance conceals an unsettling ambiguity, a stranger whose presence raises more questions than answers. That evening, around 9:40 p.m., Cindy was last observed standing beside her car in the dimly lit parking lot of Buenaventura Shopping Center. The man approached her, casually engaged in conversation, and then took action, helping to raise the vehicle with a jack and beginning to address the flat tire on the rear driver's side. To onlookers, it seemed a benevolent act, someone assisting a young woman in need. But the circumstances were peculiar. The tire had been punctured deliberately, a detail unnoticed at the time but deeply troubling in retrospect. This calculated act suggests premeditation, a manipulation of events to place Cindy in a vulnerable position. Investigators later theorized that the man's timing and methods reflected a predatory understanding of opportunity and perception. By orchestrating the punctured tire and offering help, he created the illusion of safety while simultaneously isolating Cindy from potential witnesses. His choice of a small, light-colored vehicle allowed for inconspicuous mobility, making it easier to remove Cindy from the scene without drawing attention. The precision of the setup, one that required knowledge of tire mechanics, the layout of the parking lot, and Cindy's likely response, implied careful planning. Descriptions of his demeanor further complicate the picture. Witnesses noted a calm, almost practiced manner, devoid of visible agitation. He appeared engaged in conversation, polite yet purposeful, a performance designed to reassure while concealing intent. In cases of abduction, the ability to project normalcy is often a critical tactic, and this man displayed that skill. Every movement, how he gestured, how he positioned himself near the jack, the way he navigated around Cindy's vehicle, suggested someone accustomed to controlling situations with minimal exposure. Law enforcement's attempts to identify him yielded frustratingly little. The initial description was vague enough to encompass countless men, yet detailed enough to suggest a specific profile. Likely familiar with mechanical work, possessing the confidence to manipulate a public situation without arousing suspicion. Leads emerged sporadically, including individuals with partial matches, but none were confirmed. One man, Edward Nelson Cole, at times referenced under the alias Sam Roper, superficially aligned with the witness descriptions and was investigated thoroughly, yet he vanished from the public eye before any conclusive link could be established. Later reports suggested he may have died in Florida in 2005, leaving the trail cold and unresolved. Investigators also considered behavioral patterns. The man's actions mirrored those observed in other abductions where the perpetrator carefully staged benign interactions to isolate victims. The deliberate puncture of the tire, the appearance of helpfulness, and the immediate disappearance of both Cindy and the man from the scene within 30 minutes point to someone who understood the dynamics of risk, control, and observation. Every detail, his height, build, demeanor, vehicle type, and even his approximate age, became part of a mental reconstruction, an attempt to map the psychological and logistical profile of an individual who might execute such a crime. Complicating the case were reports from subsequent sightings, though none were confirmed. Individuals resembling Cindy were reportedly seen in Oregon weeks after her disappearance, sometimes accompanied by men whose descriptions vaguely matched the unknown helper. While tantalizing, these accounts could not be verified. They suggested a continued presence of the abductor, movement along state lines, and an unsettling elusiveness. The man last seen with Cindy may have been transient, calculating, or simply vanished into anonymity, leaving investigators to piece together fragmented impressions and incomplete reports. The psychological profile developed by law enforcement indicated a manipulative, opportunistic individual capable of blending into everyday life while executing carefully calculated acts. His willingness to engage with a stranger, provide assistance, and then remove the victim from the public eye demonstrates a level of sophistication that complicated the search. It is precisely this combination of ordinariness and hidden intent that has made the man a perpetual enigma in the case. Efforts to match him to known criminals operating in California at the time were extensive. Mac Ray Edwards, with his history of methodical abductions, was a consideration, though no direct link could be established. Other local suspects were investigated, including those with criminal records or proximity to the shopping center. Witness interviews were conducted repeatedly, yet the descriptions remained frustratingly general, limiting the ability to conclusively identify the man. Investigators were left with a silhouette, a composite of traits and behaviors rather than a person with a name. Despite exhaustive searches, police never recovered any evidence connecting the man to Cindy beyond the eyewitness accounts. His vehicle, presumed small and light-colored, was never identified. He disappeared into the night, leaving behind only a flat tire and a profoundly unsettling mystery. Each passing year reinforced his ghost-like presence, someone intimately involved in Cindy's final known moments, yet entirely elusive, leaving investigators, family, and the public grasping for answers. The implications of this unknown man's role remain deeply unsettling. He was the last human connection to Cindy, the person who may have controlled her fate in those critical moments. His anonymity underscores a frightening reality. Some crimes are executed with such precision and detachment that the perpetrator's existence is known only through fleeting observation. The man changing her tire is not merely a witness. He is potentially the architect of her disappearance, a figure whose ordinary appearance masked extraordinary danger. Family and investigators alike have often pondered the duality of his presence, the ordinary man who performs a helpful act versus the extraordinary threat he may represent. That brief interaction captured in memory but absent from evidence serves as a chilling pivot point in the narrative of Cindy Lee Mellon. It is a reminder that evil often wears the guise of normalcy, that a single encounter can alter the course of a life, and that some mysteries endure because the key figure simply vanishes without trace. In examining the man who last saw Cindy, one confronts both frustration and fear. Every detail, his appearance, his vehicle, his demeanor, the timing of the interaction, has been scrutinized, yet remains inconclusive. He embodies the uncertainty that defines cold cases, a presence at the threshold of tragedy, visible for a fleeting moment, then lost forever. As investigators continue to revisit the evidence and theorize about his identity, one truth remains clear. The man changing her tire is the focal point of a mystery that continues to haunt law enforcement, the Mellon family, and anyone who seeks justice for Cindy Lee Mellon. More than 55 years have passed since Cindy Lee Mellon vanished from the Buenaventura shopping center, and yet her disappearance remains shrouded in mystery. Decades of investigation, witness interviews, tip lines, and painstaking review of old evidence have failed to yield conclusive answers. The silence is profound, a nearly impenetrable fog that has resisted every effort to illuminate the truth. Each year that passes adds another layer of frustration, grief, and unanswered questions for law enforcement, the Mellon family, and the community that continues to follow the case. From the outset, Cindy's disappearance challenged conventional investigative methods. The parking lot offered no crime scene in the traditional sense. No struggle, no blood, no weapon, no definitive clues beyond the flat tire and the man last seen with her. Forensic technology of 1970 was limited, and even as science advanced over the decades, the case had been deprived of the physical traces that might have permitted breakthroughs. Hair, fibers, fingerprints, or DNA that could have identified a suspect were either never collected or have since degraded. In this way, Cindy's case embodies the most difficult type of missing person investigation, one in which the absence of evidence is itself the defining obstacle. Despite these challenges, law enforcement never closed the file. Every few years, Investigators would review the case, exploring potential connections, re-interviewing witnesses, and following up on leads generated by media coverage or public tips. Some tips hinted at sightings in Oregon or other states, suggesting Cindy might have been abducted and transported across state lines. Others pointed to individuals with criminal histories who could have been involved, including transient or itinerant offenders. Each lead offered a glimmer of hope, but when pursued, they dissolved into uncertainty, leaving investigators with frustration and speculation. The Mellon family continued to advocate tirelessly, maintaining Cindy's visibility in public awareness. Leonard and Martha Mellon consistently shared her story with local and national media, urging anyone with information to come forward. They kept her photographs in circulation, attended volunteer searches, and engaged with organizations dedicated to missing persons. Their persistence has been a lifeline for the case, ensuring that Cindy's disappearance did not fade into the background of unsolved mysteries. Yet, even with public engagement, answers remained elusive. As decades passed, the case assumed the weight of legend, a story that fascinated both professionals and amateur sleuths. Online forums, true crime communities, and documentary projects revisited the details repeatedly. Each revisit added theories, proposed suspects, and reimagined scenarios. The unknown man who last saw Cindy remained central to every reconstruction, a ghostly figure whose motives, identity, and fate are as mysterious as the girl he was last seen with. In some analyses, his deliberate puncturing of the tire and orchestrated help are seen as indicators of a calculated, predatory mindset, though no proof has ever confirmed this. Technology eventually offered new avenues of hope. DNA analysis, forensic genealogy, and other modern methods revolutionized the way cold cases could be approached. Investigators revisited preserved evidence in search of any trace of Cindy or her abductor. Yet, decades-old degradation, the lack of collected samples, and the passage of time severely limited these opportunities. Even as technology advanced, the case remained frustratingly static, as if the crime itself had anticipated the tools meant to uncover it. Community and law enforcement cooperation continued to play a crucial role. Anonymous tips, media campaigns, and historical records searches were combined with investigative persistence to explore old leads. New interviews sometimes surfaced, reporting sightings or providing contextual details about individuals near the shopping center that night. Every potential piece of information were careful scrutiny, as the passage of decades often clouded memories, distorted perceptions, and allowed rumor to infiltrate the narrative. The enduring silence of Cindy's case is also a reflection of the human cost of unresolved disappearances. The Mellon family endured generations of uncertainty, the psychological weight of not knowing whether their daughter was alive, harmed, or beyond reach. For investigators, the inability to close the case added a persistent frustration and urgency to each review, a reminder that cold cases carry a moral imperative, to seek truth even when answers are hidden beneath layers of time and obfuscation. Occasionally, new connections were considered, linking Cindy's disappearance to known serial offenders active in California or along potential transit routes. Historical records, arrest logs, and criminal profiles were combed for clues, but every promising lead encountered the same obstacle: a lack of evidence linking any suspect directly to Cindy. As a result, her case has remained emblematic of the most challenging aspects of criminal investigation: the collision of incomplete witness memory, vanished evidence, and the deliberate actions of a perpetrator who left almost no trace. The media attention surrounding Cindy's disappearance has evolved over the years. From newspaper articles to televised true crime specials, each retelling renewed public interest and occasionally generated tips. Yet despite renewed scrutiny, the mystery endures. The man who last saw Cindy, the punctured tire, the empty parking lot, all remain focal points of a narrative that refuses closure. For viewers and investigators alike, the case is a lesson in both the limitations of human knowledge and the enduring need for vigilance and advocacy in the face of uncertainty. As of today, Cindy Lee Mellon remains officially missing. Her case continues to be investigated, reviewed, and discussed, a haunting reminder that not all mysteries yield answers within a lifetime. Each anniversary, each retrospective review serves to underscore the enduring absence, the persistent questions, and the need for continued vigilance. The silence is profound, stretching across decades, a reminder that some crimes, executed with precision and care, leave only echoes in the lives of those left behind. Ultimately, the story of Cindy Lee Mellon is one of unresolved tension, enduring grief, and the tireless pursuit of truth. It is a case where decades of effort have met with silence, where the absence of evidence is the defining feature, and where the human cost of not knowing is immeasurable. 55 years later, the mystery remains, and the hope for answers, no matter how faint, continues to drive investigators, family, and the public alike, all seeking to uncover the fate of a young woman who disappeared into the night and into history, never to return.